ministers,
Mesdames et Messieurs les ministres,
state ministers,
Mesdames et Messieurs,
ladies and gentlemen,
merci d'être venus nous rejoindre. J'ai
thank
souhaité
you
cette
for all
communication
coming
de
today.
rentrée
I wanted to take this opportunity to speak with you all, given the concerning times
de
and the
l'histoire
decisive
de notre
times that we are in our
pays. C'est un
country.
moment d'hésitation et de trouble.
There is a sense of
Et je
hesitation,
considère
of
que
much
ce
concern,
moment impose
and I
une
feel that
clarification.
we need to bring some clarity.
On connaît le contexte de cette rentrée.
We all know what the
La
current backdrop
planète
is.
ne tourne pas bien.
The world,
La loi
the earth is
internationale
not
qui, jusqu'à
in a
maintenant,
happy
depuis
place.
des décennies,
For the past
imposait que soient
10
respectés
years,
tous les pays du monde, quelle que soit
we
leur
have been
taille, avec des droits
calling
égaux.
for respect of all nations,
Cette loi est
no matter how
bafouée.
big or small they are, for their rights to not be
Les grands
violated.
empires
We have seen
ont choisi
major
désormais
empires
d'imposer leurs lois par la
who
force,
have now tried to force their own
Force
laws on
militaire,
other countries, be it military force,
avec l'assaut jamais interrompu
with
de la Russie
the
contre
unfettered attack
l'Ukraine,
from Russia on Ukraine.
tragédie du Moyen-Orient.
We've seen tragedy in the Middle East
Depuis le pogrom du 7 octobre,
since the pogrom on the 7th of October, right through to the events which we've seen in Lebanon, Iran, Gaza.
de force commerciale,
We've also seen commercial
une
forces
concurrence
at play
déséquilibrée et
with
déloyale
a mismatch
sur
and
des
unfair
centaines de
trade.
productions de la part de la puissante Chine.
We've seen production
Domination
ramping up
avec
from
des
China.
politiques de droits de douane unilatéralement imposées
We've
par
seen
les
US
États-Unis
tariffs
de M.
being implemented unilaterally by President Trump.
Puis, épreuve de force monétaire.
We've also seen a
Il y
monetary
a
power
des
struggle,
dévaluations qui se présentent comme
with
des
certain
dépréciations,
currencies
qui sont
being
exactement
devalued,
effet,
some would say even
et qui faussent la
depreciated,
concurrence. Et je pourrais
which are
continuer comme ça.
having huge follow-on effects on competition. But this is just a few
Et
examples
tout cela
of what sort of
dans
power
une
struggles we are
indifférence
seeing.
au réchauffement climatique.
On top of that, we have global warming and the fallout of global
Et à ces
warming.
causes,
Not just the fallout, but also the causes of that, be it from industry or be it from
l'Europe
our own energy
ne tourne pas
systems.
bien non plus.
Europe
Elle
is
devrait
not
parler
doing
d'une seule
well.
voix.
Europe is
Or, elle est
failing
trop
to speak
souvent
with a unified voice.
divisée,
We are
chacun
divided,
essayant de rechercher
where
d'abord
each
ses propres
person is
avantages.
trying to seek their own benefits.
Nous avons 450 millions d'habitants,
Some
c'est un immense
450
marché. Nous avons
million
cru pendant longtemps
inhabitants.
que
It's
cet
a
immense
vast
marché pouvait
market. It is one of the
se
largest markets in the world.
s'imposer de lui-même par son
So,
seul poids,
because of our sheer economic weight, we should
de
be able
puissance
to have
scientifique,
some weight in the
technologique,
game,
industrielle,
be it technology,
mais
be it
en
industry.
dépit de l'effort
We should have some
constant qui a
weight,
été
but
celui de la
despite the
France et
constant
singulièrement du
efforts
président de la
of France
République,
and the French
une
president,
impuissance politique, Mario
we
Draghi,
have
cette fin de semaine,
faced
à Rimini,
serious political
a
pushback.
prononcé une formule
Mario
que
Draghi
je crois nous pouvons tous faire
recently
nôtre.
came up
Il a
with
dit, cet été,
something which I
le
think we
rêve
can
d'une Europe
believe in.
qui compte dans
This
le monde
summer,
s'est évanoui.
he said, the dream of Europe that can count on the world
Et puis,
has
il y a
disappeared.
notre pays, la France, qui est dans un dangereux
Now,
paradoxe.
if we circle in just on France,
Un pays
we are
incroyablement doué dans tout ce
facing
qui est au sommet de
an
la
unusual
pyramide de l'œuvre
paradox
humaine,
where
du savoir,
we live in a nation with
des
extreme
sciences,
innovation.
des mathématiques,
We
de la
have
chimie, de la
extremely
génétique,
intelligent
de
people, be it in
l'algorithmique, du
science, in
quantique,
mathematics, in quantum
et puis
computing,
des technologies et productions de
in
pointe.
AI. We also have
Nous savons produire
high-tech
des lanceurs, des fusées, des satellites,
production systems. We have been able to
de
produce in
l'électricité
France
nucléaire avec des centrales
nuclear facilities,
de première
rockets for
force.
space exploration.
Nous avons les armements, nous savons produire les
We
armements les plus
can
sophistiqués,
produce
les
highly
meilleurs avions
sophisticated
du monde,
weaponry.
les meilleurs hélicoptères du monde,
We have some of the best helicopters in the
des
world
navires et des
made in
sous-marins,
France,
y compris nucléaires,
ships, submarines, nuclear
des
submarines,
automobiles de qualité,
top quality
pharmacie,
automotive production,
la culture, le
pharmaceuticals,
luxe,
the cultural sector,
l'agriculture
luxury,
et
farming,
l'agroalimentaire. Et
the
cependant,
food and beverage industry. They are all
confine
thriving,
un
or
commerce
they're all
extérieur en berne,
They're all strong in France, but economically speaking, we are being overrun by the fact that the base of the consumption pyramid is crumbling. Right at the top of the pyramid and right at the base of the pyramid, we are struggling. When it comes to white goods for homes, and this is why we have a nation which is both leading and falling behind at the same time. And this should cause us and call us to take action so that we can preserve and save our strength, so that we can focus onto the right areas. And when we're putting in so much effort, so many means and resources in the table, especially into the education sector, where we now see some of the best rankings, when we've been focusing on the fundamentals, reading, writing, mathematics, training of our younger generations. We now have 19% of our youth unemployed. That's been continually rising over the past few years. And yet, here is another paradox. We have about 1 in 5 young people without a job, and yet companies are failing to employ people. So we are not finding those people who are going to take over from the small business owners when they move on. So therefore, we all need to fight tirelessly to see industry back within our national borders. Those industries that we have been so proud of in the past, we need to be proud of them once again, now and in the future. And this applies to small, medium, large enterprises. Now, I understand much has been done over these past few years to see all of these industries back on solid feet. And we have made some headway, noteworthy headway, but it is insufficient. So it is the will, it is our will, the will of the nation, to try and build upon our strong assets and focus on shoring up those areas where we are weak. There is an immediate danger which we must tackle, not tomorrow or the day after, but now, today. We must not dally, because if we do, then the future will be out of our own grasp. And the current situation will only worsen. Our country is facing a danger of taking on too much debt. Our country is facing the danger of taking on too much debt because we have taken on too much and continue to do so. Over the past 20 decades, 20 years, national debt has reached some 2 trillion euros, 1 trillion from 2005 to 2015, and another trillion from 2015 to 2025. Now, these sorts of figures are absolutely impossible to conceive of in material terms, unless you have a quantum computer in your own mind. There is one way to make them easy to understand. For the past 20 years, every single hour of every single day of every single night, for the past 20 years, every hour, we have seen an additional 12 million euros in debt. Every hour of every day of every night for the past 20 years. Now, I understand we have had to face considerable crises over those past 20 years. We must bear that in mind. We had the subprime crisis and the financial crisis in 2008 and 2009, the yellow vests, COVID, an awful crisis which brought the entire planet to a halt. Then there was the war of annexation, which had been triggered by Russia. then the energy crisis which followed, inflation,
On vient d'entrer dans l'orage des droits de douane
and we are
déclenchés par
now
Monsieur Trump.
in the rocky waters
Il est
triggered by
bien sûr
Trump's
normal
tariff
que
war.
quand on a une crise, on essaie de passer
In
cette
times
crise
of crisis, we have done what we could by taking on additional
pour passer
debt
la vague.
to be able to
Mais ce qui est
sail over the
anormal,
crest of the wave. But what
C'est
is
que, ayant fait
unusual
appel à
now
cette,
is that
disponibilité,
having used that available
on ne soit jamais revenu en arrière.
level of debt, we've never actually brought
La
it back.
dépendance à la dette
to
est devenue en
prior
France
levels.
chronique.
We
Cet
are facing
argent
a
emprunté
chronic
par centaines
disease,
de
the chronic
milliards n'a
disease
pas été
of
utilisé
debt.
comme il aurait fallu que ce soit pour investir,
Instead of
pour doter notre
investing,
pays des meilleurs
instead of
équipements,
investing to
pour
better
construire
equip our
des
nation,
universités,
to
des hôpitaux,
build
des
more
laboratoires de
universities,
recherche.
hospitals, laboratories for our researchers.
Il a été utilisé pour les dépenses courantes.
That additional debt was used
Dépenses
for
courantes
everyday spending.
qu'aucune famille pour elle-même n'envisagerait de laisser
The sort
à la charge de
of
ses enfants.
the sort of debt that a household would never even take on, knowing that they would give it and hand it on to their children. That debt has accrued year after year, while people have just stood by and watched it
La
rise.
charge de la dette va devenir cette année
The burden of that debt this year
le budget le plus important de
is
la
going to
nation.
mean we will have the biggest budget ever.
Les annuités que nous devons rembourser
Our yearly installments to pay off that debt
être plus lourdes que le
are going
budget
to
de
be
l'éducation nationale
bigger than even our national education
et
budget,
que le budget des armées.
the budget for our
Cette
armed
année.
forces. This year.
Et si on devait regarder à peu près ce que ça veut dire,
And if we look at what that is going to mean,
cette charge de la dette représentera à elle seule plus que
the burden
l'addition
of the debt
des budgets
will
de
be
l'enseignement
more
supérieur et de la
than
recherche,
all of the budget being
logement
put
et de la
into
justice.
housing, justice,
Additionné.
and education. All three combined.
et ça va croître tous les ans,
And year after year, it will continue to
inexorablement,
rise.
si nous ne faisons rien.
And it will continue to rise if we do nothing.
L'an dernier, c'était 60 milliards.
Last year, it was 60 billion.
Cette année, ce sera
This
66
year,
milliards.
66 billion.
L'année prochaine, en
Next year,
2026,
2026,
au mieux 75 milliards.
at the lowest level, 75
Et si
billion.
nous ne corrigeons pas la trajectoire en
And if we
2029,
don't
dit la Cour des comptes,
Change where we are headed,
107 milliards.
we will reach 107 billion.
107 fois 1000 millions d'euros.
107 billion.
Et notre pays, pour voir la dimension de tout ça, notre pays,
To try and
au rythme de
understand what that
croissance qui est le
means,
sien,
Given the current growth trajectory that we
c'est-à-dire
are on,
croissance et inflation
so that's a growth and
l'ordre de 2%
inflation of around 2%
par an,
per year.
notre pays crée chaque année environ 50 milliards
Our country
de richesses
creates
nouvelles.
50 billion in new
3
wealth.
000 milliards. On produit chaque année plus que l'année précédente. C'est
So
déjà
that means
pas
new
rien
money that
de l'ordre
is
de
there this year but not the
50
year
milliards.
before. 50
Et sur
billion
ces 50
every year.
milliards créés
So
par les
of that
Français,
50 billion in new wealth created by
milliards
French men and women, 10
supplémentaires chaque année
billion, 10 additional
sont captés
billion
par les intérêts de la dette. Ça veut dire que c'est 20% du progrès de la
eaten up
France
by
qui est capté
interest
par cette
on that debt.
charge et cette menace.
And that is the
qui est
burden, that
confisqué
is
chaque
the
année.
threat that I'm talking about. Money just
C'est exactement la situation
flittering
que
away.
trop de familles, trop
And
d'entreprises et trop d'associations connaissent bien.
companies, families
C'est terrible
are
de
fully
devoir
aware
aller chaque
of
mois
this. It is
à la
terrifying to
banque
see
pour emprunter
that.
de quoi rembourser les
It's
mensualités des emprunts
terrifying
précédents.
to think that we have to go into a bank to take on new debt to pay off our
Beaucoup
past
de
debt.
Français le savent très bien.
This is a situation that
Et comme vous
many
êtes de
people
moins
know
en moins
is a dire
solvable,
situation. It is one
Vous empruntez de plus en plus cher.
putting us
ça,
into a
le fait
situation where we are no longer as solvable as we once
Et
were,
il n'y
and
a
therefore that
aucun
debt
moyen de s'en
becomes more
sortir
and
si on
more
ne prend pas
expensive.
conscience de la gravité
And there is no way we can get out of this situation
ce
if we don't
risque et de
take
cette
full
fatalité.
measure of what is
Alors, je sais
happening.
bien qu'il est beaucoup plus facile d'ignorer
I
tout ça.
know it is so easy just to stick our
de
head in the
faire comme
sand,
si on pouvait
to
continuer
pretend
sans
like we
rien
can keep
changer.
on going with the current status
Et sans
quo,
rien changer en particulier à
to
nos
change
habitudes.
nothing, to
Mais si le
change
chemin que nous choisissons
nothing in
est
terms of our current behaviors,
faire semblant,
to pretend that
feindre
all is
que le
good,
problème n'existe
to
pas.
pretend that there is no
Alors,
problem.
je vous le dis comme je le pense du plus profond de moi-même.
So
nous
what
ne
I
nous en
believe
sortirons
deeply
pas.
is that we will not make
Nous,
it through.
France,
We,
tous ensemble,
France, all together,
nous en
we will
sortirons
not
pas
make it
comme
through.
État,
We will
et
not
comme
make it through
société,
as a country, as a society,
parce que c'est notre liberté qui est en jeu, c'est notre
because it
souveraineté,
will have a
et
negative effect
notre
on our
indépendance.
freedoms, on our
Car si l'on
independence.
est toutes les familles le savent.
And this is
Si
what
vous êtes
everyone
dépendant
knows.
financièrement
If you are financially
pour un
dependent
État, c'est comme si vous êtes soumis
as a state,
militairement.
it is just the same as being
C'est la
subjected
même chose.
through military force.
Dépendre des prêteurs
Being so
pour une
dependent
famille,
on
dépendre de la banque, parce que
loans
vous êtes menacé de saisie,
as a home, it means that you are
pour
dependent
une
on the
entreprise,
banks who have lent you that money.
parce que vous êtes
It means
menacé
that
de
your
redressement
home is on the
judiciaire.
line.
Ceci n'est pas
For a
une
company,
situation
it means
qui
that your
vous
company
permet
may be shut down. This is not
de
a
vous
situation
épanouir et d'être heureux.
where one, as an individual or
Et
as a
autant
society,
que je
can
le
find fulfillment.
Je ne laisserai pas notre pays s'enfoncer
And
dans ce
I
risque,
will not stand by and watch our country
parce que c'est
fall
notre
under
liberté qui est en
this
jeu. Alors je ne
wave,
referai pas devant vous.
this risk.
J'ai déjà fait la liste des pays
I've
qui nous
already
entourent,
listed the
qui ont été
countries
rattrapés
around
par
us
ce
who
cauchemar
have
et des
fallen foul
sacrifices qu'ils ont
of
dû
the
consentir. Le
nightmare
Canada, des grands
and
pays,
these sorts of sacrifices that they
le
would have to
Canada,
make.
la Suède,
Canada,
dans les
Sweden,
années 90,
back in the 90s,
la Grèce, l'Italie,
Greece,
l'Espagne,
Italy,
le
Spain, Portugal,
Portugal dans les années 2000.
in the
Et on
2000s.
sait bien ce qui se passe, on coupe dans les retraites.
And we know what that means. It
30%
means
de
it cutting into the retirement
dans certains
budgets,
pays.
into
On coupe dans
pension,
les salaires de la fonction publique, 15% de moins.
15% job cuts in the
On
public
licencie
sector,
des fonctionnaires
civil
et
servants
on
being
augmente
laid off,
massivement les impôts.
massive increases in
Dans le
taxes.
pays, la France, qui paye déjà le plus d'impôts. C'est ça la
Given
fatalité.
that in France we already
C'est
pay
ça
such
ce
high
qui
levels of
nous
taxes,
menace, et ce sont
this
des
is the
menaces auxquelles
threat
personne ne
that
peut
we have to
prospérer.
take into full account
Mais
because
non
we
seulement
cannot
ça, mais
avoid it.
la puissance du rapport de force avec
But
les
the
prêteurs, ceux qui
Power struggle that is at play
prêtent l'argent
with
dont vous avez
those
besoin.
lending agencies, those people who lend
Cette
you
puissance
money.
des rapports de force, il y a 3
That
ans à
power
peine,
struggle some
au Royaume-Uni,
3 years ago in the United
nos
Kingdom,
voisins britanniques,
neighbours just across the water,
un gouvernement pourtant conservateur,
the Conservative
dirigé
government
par Liz Truss,
under Liz
ce
Truss,
gouvernement a sauté en 42 jours,
it could not hold just 42 days,
6 semaines.
6 weeks,
Parce que les marchés, c'est-à-dire les
simply
prêteurs,
because
ont considéré que
markets,
les décisions que le gouvernement avait prises,
though
des
the
décisions
markets
de
who had
baisse
lent the money
d'impôts et de
determined
recours
that
massif à l'endettement,
the government, using huge
n'étaient
debt and
financièrement
not
pas viables.
reforming the tax system, was not a
La
viable
Grande-Bretagne,
solution for Great Britain.
un des plus influents des grands pays du
Great
monde,
Britain, one of the most influential countries in the
membre
world,
comme nous du Conseil de sécurité
a member
des Nations
of the
Unies, et
UN
de
Security
surcroît,
Council,
pour les initier, la place forte des
and
banques,
such
des
a
financiers,
key
des
place
négociers.
for banks, for the
Renversé
financial
en 6
markets. The government was overturned in just 6 weeks.
La France ne peut pas ignorer ce danger.
France cannot stand
Elle
by
ne
and
peut pas
ignore
ne rien faire.
the very
Et
present
pour un
danger
accident, si elle ne prend pas
that we are
des
facing.
décisions courageuses,
We have to make brave
mais
decisions,
encore possibles et supportables,
things
qui
that are still
s'imposent,
within
que nous
our reach,
débattons.
that we must do, that we
Alors
must fight
j'entends
for.
très bien ceux nombreux parmi nos
I
compatriotes
hear
qui disent
what many people are saying.
mais il n'y a
Within
aucune
France.
raison que ce soit à nous qu'on demande des efforts.
Why do we have
C'est pas
to
notre faute, c'est la faute des
do it?
gouvernements.
It's not our doing, it's the government's doing.
Et donc c'est aux gouvernements qui se sont succédés qu'il faut
It's up
demander des
to
comptes, pas à
those
nous.
various governments who came in one after the other who have to be held
Alors,
accountable,
il se trouve que
not
plusieurs
us.
d'entre vous le savent que pendant ces 20 dernières années,
Now, I'm sure you are all fully
je
aware
me
that
suis
over the past
battu
20
presque
years,
toujours tout seul
I was often alone
pour convaincre de ce
in
risque
trying to
politique,
fight
les décideurs et nos concitoyens
against
qui tous,
those
je dois
politicians
l'avouer, s'en moquaient comme de
who
leur premier biberon.
didn't seem to care for what was happening.
Mais cela me permet de rappeler à tout le monde
Let
que la
this
dette,
serve as a reminder.
ce ne sont pas les gouvernements qui la consomment.
Debt is not used up by governments. It's not consumed by governments. Year after year, this massive level of debt, it was put into our current spending, into providing money for citizens. Remember COVID. This is what I said with Elizabeth Borne. To pensioners, some 600 billion. Catherine and Astrid, 600 billion over the past few years. To consumers with reduced VAT, with guarantees for pay. For those receiving benefits. To companies and therefore to employees through lower employer and employee contributions. So that those people who don't have a job could survive. But the truth of the matter is that debt and the benefits of that debt are shared. Now, when I look at what is being said within Parliament, during Parliament discussion, during the crisis, when the budget has been discussed, a vast majority of what people said was to ask not for less spending but more spending. Obviously everyone fighting for their own interests. Looking at the heads of government, they nodded. Now, for fear of repeating myself, is there such a thing as useful debt? Given that the loan conditions were so favorable with such low interest rates, leading us to think that this money could have easily been used, we could have invested more. But that was not what was decided at the time. We did not decide to invest. However, more recently, with France 2030 under the French president, yes, some of this debt is being used to invest in the future. So unfortunately, there is such a thing as bad debt, and bad debt overran good debt. So we've seen a massive increase in interest rates, not just for individuals, but also for governments. And quite simply what that means is that it is now too expensive to build. It is becoming too expensive to buy a home, to buy a flat. The construction industry is at a standstill with hundreds of thousands of jobs on the line. It is now too expensive to buy a home and to even fit that home with basic appliances. This is the direct consequence on individual households. And that's not to forget all of the other impacts are going to befall the government. And when you have low interest rates, it's good for the economy, but high interest rates, we all know that it brings economies to a standstill. So I will fight, nail and tooth, along with the government, to take on as many risks as possible so that we can avoid falling into the danger that we have been speaking of. But this is a debate which is so essential for our nation, has fallen into confusion over the past few weeks, and which is why I need to clarify a few points. The discussion, the debate needs to focus more on the absolutely vital necessity to spend less and produce more, so that our country can get back on the right path where we reach debt stability within 4 years. A trajectory which will take us through to 2029. And I feel that debate has lost focus. We're no longer talking about how absolutely essential it is that we take action. We're only talking about measures, individual measures. Measures like public holidays, Measures which I said, they are up for discussion, can be improved, can be amended. Again, sitting down with trade representatives, with parliamentarians.
Parce que c'est la mission du Parlement. Ne débattre que des mesures.
Only discussing individual measures is to forget the overall view of how essential this plan is. But it is this overall view that we need to discuss about. All discussions, all debate, which become too heated. Now, we know that there are some discussions which may lead to taking no action. But all of these discussions which are too impassioned lead us always into a dead end. And on top of that, there is an additional sense of contestation with Mr. Mélenchon leading the charge and calling on bringing everything to a halt and going on generalized strike. A few years ago, Mr. Mélenchon outlined his own strategy to ultimately bring about a revolution. And he said everything needs to become a conflict. And that means taking every single issue and making it a reason for conflict, for confrontation, to bring about disorder. And through disorder, you'll bring down society. And this week, he said, we are specialists in organizing a complete mess, never taking a second to think about what sort of harm that is going to do to companies, to families, to households, by creating disorder that he is calling for on the 10th of September. So with no great surprise, he was joined by another parliamentarian who said one of the most outrageous things I've ever heard, by Sandrine Rousseau, who said, I don't care about having profitable agriculture. Something which was taken as being a spit in the face to all farmers and all these people who appreciate what they do for our nation, who give their blood, their sweat to feed our nation. To say that she does not care about those people who are out there in the fields toiling away, saying that she does not care about whether they succeed or not, that is where these types of people want to see our nation ending up. And that is why, with a very clear mind, I say today that I truly believe that is not what France is. France is not a nation where we are going to bring about disorder and bringing France to its heels. We are a nation where we want to work together to build a nation. And that is why, as we come out of the summer holidays, we need things to be much clearer.
Y a-t-il ou pas urgence nationale à rééquilibrer nos comptes publics?
Is there or not a vital need to bring back stability to our accounts, to find a cure to this disease known as debt? Because all of the French men and women, all of the households out there are watching us.
Et cela en choisissant une trajectoire de retour à la maîtrise de la dette en 4 ans, d'ici à 2029.
Need to bring back a safe debt level within the next 4 years.
La question centrale.
That is what we need to focus on. Now, the discussion about each individual measure, that's neither here nor there. That's something else. It's another issue that requires a different conversation. That is a conversation which can only happen after. Again, sitting down with industrial relations representatives and sitting down with parliamentarians and senators, bringing the debate back onto this core topic is what we need to do. We have to do it now. And the space in which that can take place is the Parliament, through structured debate, with a vote, and not through disorderly confrontation down in the streets. And that is why I called on the French president, who accepted, to call an extraordinary session of the Parliament on the 8th of September. On that day, I will put the government's responsibility on the line with a general policy according to Article 49-1 of our Constitution. The general policy statement will serve a key purpose: to focus the debate back on that key topic, which is to say, is there a serious danger facing our nation? Is it an urgent situation? And if so, what is the road forward? What is the road forward to have healthier finances, to reduce our deficit while producing more?
Consacrera la dimension de l'effort. Celui-là seul effort qui ne peut pas être écarté et qui ne peut
This
pas être
will
éludé
require
si nous voulons
considerable
trouver
effort
la trajectoire de la libération
for us to be able to reach that final
de notre
goal.
indépendance, c'est-à-dire quelques 44 milliards de réduction du déficit.
So therefore we need to reduce our deficit by 44 billion, given that we have an overall provision of about 1.1 trillion, so only a 2% budgetary effort. It will be an opportunity to focus on the fundamental principles, the few fundamental principles that we have. One, of fairness in sharing the load, sharing the effort. The state, the government, will take on its fair share, as will all French men and women and companies. And the discussion for each of those measures, for each of those individual parts, will take place again at a second stage, in a fully open debate, with consultation of trade union representatives and both chambers of our Parliament. I truly believe that all French men and women truly understand how serious the situation currently is. I believe that they will willingly play their fair share as long as it is fair. It is essential because it is how we can get our country back on track. If we can satisfactorily reach the end of this process, then we will have avoided the two deathly issues that we're currently facing: powerlessness and disorder. Disorder that brings everything to its feet. And this is so important for those who are always forgotten in these sorts of discussions and debates. Those people who we are here today to speak for, the children of our nation. We cannot leave them a world under the weight of debt, one where they are disheartened because the world is disheartening. We need to think of them with every decision we make. Those people who don't yet have the right to vote, who cannot be heard in the public debate, but these are the people for whom we are taking action. We need to think of them in all of our discussions, in every decision we make. And as adults, as responsible, loving adults, we should be able to do this, because the children are this most important part of building our future. Each and every one of us will have to face up to our responsibilities. The government will take on its own responsibility. The Parliament, on the 8th of September, will be given an opportunity to decide,
Chacun s'engage devant les Français.
and everyone will have to take
C'est là,
responsibility.
au fond, que la démocratie prend tout son
And
sens. Je vous remercie.
this is where democracy comes into its own. Thank you.
Est-ce que vous avez des questions en vous présentant chaque fois?
As his government aims to shave off 44 billion euros in public spending, Bayrou outlined the various crises France has weathered over the past 2 decades, including the subprime crisis, COVID-19, and the war in Ukraine. He added that the world was not in a good place. Bayrou spoke about how France was a leader in many fields, including defense, luxury, but at the same time was falling behind with a youth unemployment rate that stands at 19%. We can now bring in Andrew Smith, historian of modern France and senior lecturer at Queen Mary University, who was listening to Bayrou's statement there with me. What did you make of what the Prime Minister had to say, where he essentially called out the left for attempting to take the battle and the problems France has out on the streets?
A really big surprise announcement there. Of course, I was joking earlier on about 49.3 and forcing things through Parliament. Of course, what Francois Bayrou has sought permission to do is enact 49.1. That means they will hold this sort of vote of confidence, a sort of back me or sack me process on the 8th of September, preempting that big movement, that big blockage campaign on the 10th of September. So this is an attempt to bring things back into Parliament, to make people kind of realise their responsibilities and try to kind of sort things out within the Parliament. Now, in terms of his message, look, I mean, he said all this before for the last, 20-odd years. Well, you might say the last 40-odd years he's been in politics. But certainly it sounds a lot like he said on the 15th of July in his speech. We've heard these. If you're one of those few, those happy few that sat and watched his Facebook Live or his YouTube videos he made, he said much of these same things. Debt as a chronic illness. France trying to keep its head up amid a turbulent sea of global struggles. And the message really was here that the country has to spend less, and that France has to work more as a result, to spend less and produce more. Now, that's his solution. That's what we've looked at. But as he said, to try and counteract this idea of taking things to the streets, he said, let's take it back to Parliament. And so, back me or sack me on the 8th of September. It's a big old day down in the National Assembly.
But won't it be a risky move, the fact that he's doing this to take it back to Parliament, because the government could end up shooting itself in the foot? I mean, this is something that Emmanuel Macron did exactly last year.
Absolutely. Yes, it's not dissolving Parliament, so we will still have the same kind of process. We won't have any more elections, but I will probably guess, for me, unless something radically changes, unless there is some big movement, it looks to me like everything already is ranged against Bayrou's government and its budget plan. Look, he's tried to win round kind of social actors like the unions, but already we know he's not going to, for example, the CFDT kind of Université, the big summer thing tomorrow. We looked at this, he said, for the last 20 years, debt's being added. Well, people will say to him, rightly enough, I think, well, who's been in charge for the last 8 years? There is really not much to pull on to win people round. So this does look a very, very risky bet. And I would, if I were a betting man, it's what I say he might well lose.
We'll see what happens come the September 8th. But I want to ask about the current climate, because he did talk about divisions within Europe, failing to speak with a unified voice. This, of course, comes weeks after we had Ursula von der Leyen, who struck a trade deal with the United States. Bayrou was actually quite outspoken about how Europe essentially bent the knee to Washington. At the same time, we're going to have the French president who wants to continue sending funds to Ukraine, continue to arm Ukraine if there is ever a ceasefire deal reached with Russia. At one point, how will the government justify making these cuts, these savings, while at the same time continuing to arm a country that is not in Europe, that is not in NATO?
think it will be recourse to languages of sovereignty. It will continue to be. We know that Emmanuel Macron used this language in his, his last presidential run. He spoke of the need for strategic autonomy. We've seen him question, even before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, this idea of, where NATO leadership was going, and a need to reinvest in, securing a Europe which can protect its people. And I think it will be pushed really at this idea of saying this is not about simply supporting a country which is not in Europe. This is about the sort of the territorial integrity of Europe. This is about recognizing that Russia does not stop at Ukraine in terms of territorial demands. It's about recognizing that attacks against Europe's borders and war in mainland Europe is a reality that we're facing today.
But Andrew, if I could just jump in on your point, Andrew, if I can jump in on your point, which you're making there, in terms of, for example, defense purchases for Ukraine, today Kyiv said it wants to ask allies for $1 billion per month of defense purchases from the United States. So we've had the French president who's spoken about Europe standing on its own, but at the end of the day, it's the US who wants to sell its weapons but get Europe to pay.
It's a discussion about debt, it's a discussion about trade, it's a difficult one in terms of realizing these things. But I think at the same time, France is no slouch in terms of selling weapons and selling all the rest of it. One of the largest arms dealers in the world. And so I'm certain that French weapons producers will look to whet their beak as well. This is not something I think to be sold away in terms of basic trade. I think that language will be about sovereignty and production and investment in France. We heard already in that speech today about reshoring production, about looking to see that France can produce all that it needs in terms of industry. So for me, that's a language of sovereignty, which I think is consistent with the politics of Macronism since certainly the last presidential election. So I think France will be kind of resolute in its support for Ukraine, trying to push and lead a European response to this. Again, underlining the fact that they can't rely on shifting American whims in terms of this quite vital, I think, existential security policy.
How do you think the far right is going to react based on what they've heard from the Prime Minister today?
It's going to be a challenge, I think, because we know that the far right will be frequently pushing for likely a vote of censure. It's not really in their interest to keep Francois Bayrou in place. This is almost something that they would welcome because they can bring down the government and cause all the kind of problems that they might want without ever having to contribute anything positive. And we've seen already they're going to be putting a counter-proposal budget to Bayrou. It would be surprising if this is something the government's able to accept. I think it's going to be about leveraging the idea of chaos to their maximum electoral advantage. That is what I think the reaction will be.
If the far right sells it to their electorate that these 44 billion euros is essentially an austerity budget, won't that make them more popular when they look to the presidency down the line?
I think absolutely it will. This is the difficulty of the kind of the politics of that type of demagoguery, that when you look at these rather fantasy budgets, as we've seen in previous years, they often don't stack up. They're not always intended to make fiscal sense. But more than ever, the far right is looking at targeting the presidency, looking at really making a run at election. And I think this will be the big problem when suddenly fantasy numbers and theories about debt really come crunching home. So I think this will be a moment where they will sell this as an austerity budget. They will promise untold millions of investment, but in reality, those will be fantasy numbers designed for short-term political gain.
Andrew Smith, thank you so much for joining us on the program today with your analysis. More news coming up. Stay with us.